Alright, so I'm just going to go over the basics of arrays and array lists in Java and what you need to know in order to use them for the most part. And towards the end, I'll also go over toString methods because they are needed to do something in our current assignment in class. So if you only need help for understanding a specific thing that I'm going over, there's going to be timestamps down in the description. And if you're on mobile, I know description timestamps don't work, so there'll also be a comment pinned, and so you can use the timestamps in those. So if you just need a specific thing, you can just skip ahead to that using the timestamps I provide. I'll start off with arrays, and arrays in Java work similarly to how they did in C. They're a fixed length, the elements are zero indexed, and you can make an array out of pretty much anything. And what I mean by that is you can make arrays of your primitive variables as well as an array of any object you want. Declaring a new array in Java is really simple. All you have to do is state the array type. So up here in VS Code, I'm just going to make a type of integer and follow that up with just a set of brackets. These brackets are always going to be empty. In Java, an array size is not set during the declaration of the array. I'll explain a little bit more on that in just a bit. And so after these brackets, you just want to give a name to this array, just like any other variable or object you create. And that's just how you declare a new array in Java. So currently I have an integer array called nums, and it has like no value assigned to it yet. Now, instantiating your arrays. There's two ways to instantiate your arrays in Java. One way is just providing a list of values. So I'm just going to provide 1, 2, and 3. And when you do the way where you provide a list with it, you can only do that on the same line as the declaration. So as you see, if I just say that nums equals, it says that array constants can only be used in initializers, and that's just saying that if I want to give a list, I have to do it when I'm declaring this array. And the other way that you can create a new array in Java is just by using the new keyword, like you would for making a new object, the type of the array again, and square brackets. Now, inside these square brackets, you can fill in a number. So in this case right here, I just made a new integer array that has the space for 5 different integers inside of it. And that's how you specify your size of your array for an empty array in Java. If you remember in C, it would have been something more like this. And then you would call your malloc function and all that. But this is how you would do something similar to that in Java. So iterating over an array is pretty simple. I'm gonna go back to this 1, 2, 3. Gonna add an extra term for the heck of it. I'm gonna go back to just having that. And so it's really simple to iterate over an array. To do so, all you need to do is create a for loop and start that off at index 0, and while I is less than your array's length, and you want to increment your value at the end of that. So I is starting off at 0 because arrays are 0 indexed, and this nums.length is the length of your array. It's the size of your array. And so the size is going to be the total number of elements starting counting from 1 in your array, and so this will just loop until you hit the very last element in the array. And so something to keep note is the very last element in your array is always going to be the length of the array minus 1, because array elements are 0 indexed. So anyways, I'm just going to print out a simple thing. So I'm just going to say the ith number is, and I'm just going to say nums I. So all that's going to do is print out to your console. It's going to say the ith number, and I being 0, 1, 2, whatever number the loop is currently at in that iteration. And it's just going to say the blank number is, and it's going to get that index from the integer array that we created called nums. And it's just going to print that out to the console. So if I pop that open, you see the 0th number is 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you see 1, 2, 3, 4. That makes sense. So that's how you go about iterating over an array in Java. You just use a for loop and use the length array, the array's length value, my bad. Array lists are similar to arrays in Java, but there are a few key differences. First, array lists can only store objects. So if you want to store one of the primitive variables, you have to use that primitive's wrapper class. And a wrapper class is basically just an objectified version of a primitive variable. And on screen now are some primitives and their respective wrapper classes. So if you want to make an array list of floats, for example, you would do so like this. You would go ahead and you'd say, I want to make an array list, and inside a set of brackets, you just would say float, and I'll call this float list. And I'm going to say that float list is equal just to a new array list that stores floats, and put up parentheses to finish off that constructor. So this float with a capital F is the float variable's wrapper class. And so in order to make an array list that stores floats, I just specify that it uses the float object, and I can just pass in and add. So if I want to say float list, I can just add a new float value to that list. Should specify that that is a float. And so that's just adding a float value to the list. And so you can still pass in your regular primitive types. It's just that the type of the array list needs to be declared using that wrapper class of the primitive. Another thing that makes array lists different is that they don't have a set size. Array lists will change in size as you add and remove elements from the list. So before I make this, the default constructor for an array list, I believe, creates a new array list with 10 spaces in it, but if you get that array list size, I'm pretty sure it still has a size of 0 because nothing is stored in that array list. So it doesn't really matter. It's basically like you're just declaring something that's empty. Don't think too hard about it. It's nothing really important that you need to learn. But after I add this float, for example, this array list now has a size of 1, and at the 0th index, I'm currently storing the float value 3.14. And so if I were to add a number, if I were to add another float, so float list.add 599. Now this has a size of 2, and so if I were to get the size of this array, so let's just print out that size to console. Current float list size is, and I'm just going to add float list size. Okay, and I will go ahead and copy that, paste that. And so if I go ahead and run this, you'll see down here, current float list size is 1, and that is after I add the 3.14, and then after I add the 599, the current float list size is now 2. And so the size of the array list will change as you add and remove elements, and that's just a visual representation for people who need to see it to understand it. One last thing is that there is a few different ways to iterate over an array list. And so the first way is to use the same method that we used for the normal array. And so down here, I'm going to use this float list as an example. So we're just going to say for int I equals 0, I is less than float list dot size I plus plus. And you may have noticed up here and in here, the dot size is a method of the ArrayList class. It is different from how you're calling the straight variable length in your array. So just remember that if you need to get the length or size of an array list, you're calling a method on that array list, and it also gives you the size of that list starting from 1 counting up. And so the final element in an array list is going to be size minus 1. And just here, what we're going to do is we're going to say we're just going to tell it to print out whatever float is at the index that the loop is currently iterating over for I. And so it's going to print out the 3.14 and it's going to print out the 599. Again, I can show you that by go ahead and run that, and you see right down here, it's got that 3.14 and that 599. The next way that you can iterate over an array list, and I'm going to create a new array list for this. Let's make this one an array list of, let's make an array list of strings. I'll call this str list equals new array list. And we're just going to say string. Okay. And so let me just say str list dot add. Okay. And we're just going to add a few strings to this. So let's do hello, world, Java, cheese, and I'm a string. Okay, so I just added these 5 strings to our list. And so the second way to do it is using a special type of for loop. And that special type of for loop is just you say for, you give the object type of whatever that array list is storing. So in this case, it's a string, a name for a temporary variable to use inside of this for loop. So I'm just going to say that I have a string s, and then you're going to put a colon here and the name of the list that you're iterating over. So str list. And so if I want to print out every single string within this list, I can just say system.out.println, and I can directly use this temporary variable that only exists within this for loop, and I can just call that directly and do some stuff with that. So let's just keep it like that. And so if I go ahead and run this now, again, as you'll expect, I'm actually going to comment these out. And so now when I compile and run the program, you'll see it print out our 5 strings to the console. One thing to note that when you use this type of for loop to iterate over an array list, you cannot add or remove values to the array list inside of that for loop. So if I were to just say strlist.add blah, I will encounter an error when running my program because you can't modify the array list inside of here, because just remember that you cannot add or remove elements from an array list if you use this type of for loop. You can, however, still add and remove elements inside an array list. I'm sorry, add or remove elements to an array list if you iterate over the array list using this method up here. There is one more way to iterate over an array list, and that's using the ArrayList method of for each. So I would call it on the list. I'd say for each, and that involves using lambda expressions and anonymous methods, which and you probably won't have to use that in this course. I actually would be surprised if we do, but just know that these two methods here are good enough for most situations. So for the sake of example, I wrote a sample class that just allows you to make objects that represent fractions, and one of my constructors just creates a fraction object with random numerator and denominator variables. And so that's just to make it easier to quickly add some random elements to an array list that is storing fractions in this example I'm doing. So I'm going to declare an array list, and I'm going to make it of type fraction, and we're going to call it fractions list. And I'm going to set that equal to new array list of type fraction. Okay, so now we have an array list that stores fraction objects that I have made in this fractions class. And I'm just going to make a simple for loop that adds 10 random fractions to our array list. Oh, shoot. And so I'll just say fractions list dot add new fraction. And so I'm just getting 10 random fractions added to this array list. And now I'm going to iterate over this array and print out each of these fraction elements. So let's use this for fraction f in fractions list. And we're just going to say system.out.println. We're going to say fractions list dot index of f. And this just returns what index the currently selected object is at. So you'll see what that looks like in a second. We're going to say plus. We're going to just print out f. And so if I go ahead and I compile and run this, you see that we get the indexes 0 to 9. So we have 10 objects being printed out, but we have this weird gibberish where it includes the fraction class name and then a bunch of random characters. Now, what these random characters and like right after this class name is, this is actually the memory addresses of each of these objects being printed out. It's not any information that is attached to the fraction object. It's just printing out where it's stored in memory. And part of that is because I didn't write a toString method in my fraction class. All a toString method does is it allows you to take an instance of an object from that class, and it allows you to create a string from it that can be used for representing that object, essentially. So here in this toString, we're just going to return the numerator, and we're going to use a / as a fraction bar, and we're just going to put it over the denominator. So what this is doing is it's returning a string where it has the numerator value over denominator value. And now that I've written a toString method for my fraction object, I can now directly call it inside a print statement. I don't have to call the toString method on the object inside the print statement, because that will be done automatically when the program runs. So all I need to do is just recompile and run my program. And now we have at each element in the array and what that fraction at that index within the array list is. And it just prints out now properly formatted to how you would expect to see a fraction. All right, and that's pretty much everything I had planned to cover for you guys. And I hope I was able to help out and explain these things a little better for you. If this did really help you out, please consider donating some money to my PayPal. I will include a link in the description. Mainly because making this video did take quite a bit of my personal time, and it actually took a lot of effort for me to put together, because I had to type up a script and do some recording and edit it all together. So please do consider. I know not everyone is able to donate, because we're all broke college students. But I'm not going to refuse to make more of these videos if it's needed just because nobody donated. It's really just a way of helping me out and making some of this stuff easier on me. Anyway, if something's still foggy, just go ahead and ask me here or ping me on the Discord channel with your questions. Like I said, that's all I have for you guys, and I hope it was helpful. And I guess have a good day.